Hi, team. I tend to talk a lot about feedback, I think. The topic came up recently in our certification program, and it was a group within that program talking about how at their company, feedback isn't happening, and it's really hard to get clear feedback from their team and discerning or critical feedback from their team. And in that same week, as hearing that was true, I just got some deep feedback. And let's see, feedback that I'm judgy, or feedback that I don't allow as much quiet as I should in sessions that I'm running, or pushy, that kind of stuff. You all have probably heard me talk about that before. And whenever I hear that kind of feedback, it really is, it still is, even as I said it to you, you might have noticed, I had a physical reaction. And it's all true a lot of the time. So it's so helpful, because even though I know that it is helpful to some people sometimes if I allow more time for quiet, it's still not an automatic change. It's a pretty close behavior of mine to think that I am more effective if things move quickly, if I am filling the space. If there is silence, something is wrong. So it's really helpful to be reminded. And the kind of gut punch that can happen, it happens even when the feedback is delivered just perfectly, like I'm having the thought then, using unarguable speech, and after I've been asked if I'm open to feedback, all of the right things. And generally, I react in the right way. I hear the feedback, I take a breath, I say thank you. Sometimes I go home that night and beat the heck out of myself, but leaving that aside, I'm not bad at the practice of getting feedback, and I am not bad at the practice of offering feedback. I certainly think that I do it regularly. When these folks were talking, it got me thinking about that feeling of kind of, that feeling I get, just a little expel of air, if not a gut punch. And I asked these three leaders on this call who were from the same company how they felt about getting feedback that feels like a gut punch. It's my experience that it often feels that way to me, because the feedback that I usually get is so similar to the feedback that I'm getting for the last, 35 years that I can't, it's like, really still, it's still here. Okay, of course it's still here, because that's my learning edge. So of course that's how it goes. And I asked these folks if they felt willing to have that feeling of, just for a minute. And it occurred to me that there's a way you can look at this in reverse, which is, if you go through a whole week or even a whole 2 weeks without having quite that feeling, that you probably are not getting that much feedback. And if you hold the belief that feedback is really valuable, which means that even though you're improving on these behaviors that are your learning edges, even though you do whatever you do that sometimes can be hurtful, or whatever your version of that is, overly deferential, even though that's still the thing that gets noticed most of all, it gets noticed less often. If you're not getting that kind of a reaction in your system, there's a reasonably good chance you actually aren't getting real feedback. And so if you hold yourself out as a leader who loves real feedback, who gives real feedback, now you can often be the kind of person who gives it and doesn't get it. That's worth looking at. But if you're the kind of person who just says, I just love really getting it, and you haven't felt that sense of mild dissonance in a while, I think it's really worth looking at your unconscious commitments. And what that might look like is, you look fragile when you get feedback, or you paper things over. You hero things that feel difficult when they arise, which might make people feel like you're not available to hear anything difficult. Or you get incredibly defensive when something comes up that might be feedback on something that isn't related to you directly, or at least personally, but is related to a project you're working on. So they might infer that that same kind of reaction would occur if they were to give you feedback that's more related to you personally. So I'm curious, how many of you have had that experience, that little bit of a in the last few weeks or a month or so? And if you have, what's the feedback you got? And if you haven't, what's one way you might be contributing to the dearth of golden feedback in your life? Have a good night, everyone.